Okay, so in the daily work folder, there's a folder with today's date, and let's click on that page. Okay, so we have an exam coming up 1 week from today, so I'm going to click on the exam study guide. Okay, so for this exam, the topics that you could have essay questions on are Python GUI programs. Okay, so no Python programming, but there will be essay questions on Python GUI programs like what you did in Project 2. Okay, there's going to be questions about the .pgpass file, so you won't be asked to create a .pgpass file or anything like that, but there'll be essay questions. Then there's going to be some questions on the 3 different types of SQL queries that we've looked at. So select query, insert query, update queries. Okay, and then I put the basic syntax for each of those just down below there. And then I gave a sample of practice questions. Okay, so if you had init.sql that was created using that statement, had that statement to create a users table, then there's several questions there that basically it asks you to come up with the SQL commands for. Okay, so I will definitely try to work those out before next time. We'll go over it on Wednesday, but definitely take a look at it before then. Okay, any questions with respect to the exam a week from today? Okay, if you think of any, email me or ask me next time. Okay, and then the other thing, of course, is to get back to working on Project 3. Okay, so I'm going to open up the project3.html file, okay, and then take a look at the things that we're going to take a look at today. Okay, so basically I already started up my VMware virtual machine, and then also I started up the Docker machine. And what we want to do is go into the Postgres SQL container and then get into the Project 3 folder inside of include, inside of docs. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm starting up ConEMU terminal. And I'm going to load up the environment variables. Okay, and then I'm going to open a second terminal. So that I can be inside the database and then also take a look at a Python program. Okay, so let's load up the environment variables here also. Okay, I'm going to change into the main Docker directory in both of those. And then start up the Docker containers. Okay, and at this point, I'm still going to be for Project 3, still going to be in just the Postgres SQL container. So for both shells, I'll just connect to that. And in both terminals, I'm going to change into the same Project 3 directory. Okay, so /home/include/project3. And I'll do that in both shells. Okay, so now I'm ready to start on that first item. So let's go back to the web page. Okay, so we want to log into project3_db as super user. Then we're going to set output to unaligned using /A. Remember that toggles back and forth, so make sure that it's in unaligned format. Then we're going to use /O to write to the output file functions.txt. Okay, so that's going to be the first thing I do. Doesn't matter which terminal I'm in, so I'm going to go in like this. Okay, so instead of connecting to the CENT280 DB database, I'm going to connect to the project3_db database. Normally, right, we don't connect to the database using the super user. We usually use the regular user, Bob. But in this case, we're going to do something where we can get rid of all the extra functions that the PG Crypto extension adds in. So then when we bring in our own functions, we don't have a really long list of functions to look at. Okay, so I'm going to start up and PGSQL _man. Oh, what did I do here? Okay, sorry, entered the wrong password. And if you look, you can see that we're connected as a root user because the prompt is a pound symbol instead of a greater than symbol. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go /A. Okay, so it says output format is unaligned. That's what I want to do. And I'm going to check. I'm going to go /df. And we have all these functions in there because last time we ran create extension PG Crypto as the super user. But I want to make it show up this way because when I create the output file, I need it to be in the unaligned format, not the aligned format. Okay, so I verified I'm in the unaligned format. So I'm going to go /O functions.txt, then /df. So it displays all the functions, then /O to write to that output file. And then this is where it's useful to have two shells open. If I just do an ls, we can see functions.txt shows up. And because we did the setup last time, we have makedrop.py inside of this folder. So I'm going to run that now. Okay, and it asks for the name of the file containing functions, which I just saved as functions.txt. Okay, name of the SQL script to write to. So I'm going to write to drop.sql. Okay, so I changed this program a little bit from the last time we used it because it prompts now for the name of the file containing functions. So I just type that in. And then also the name of the file to write to. Okay, and then it's going to say, are these PG Crypto functions? And the answer is yes. So I type a Y. And then it writes things. Okay. So if I took a real quick look at drop.sql, you're going to see that it has all this drop stuff inside of it. Okay, so first it alters the extension, then it drops it. Okay, so I'm still in this database. When I run drop.sql, I need to be connected as a super user because if I were connected as Bob, then I wouldn't be able to alter the extension PG Crypto because Bob doesn't have the permissions in order to do that. Okay, so I'm in a super user, you can tell, right, because this is a pound symbol there. And I'm going to go /I drop.sql. After that runs, if I do /df in underlying mode, then I just see the two digest functions in there. Okay, so that's basically the first step we want to do in order to set things up. Okay, and so the main reason for doing so is that later on we're going to add in our own functions, okay, as the Bob user, but when we go /df, we don't want to have a super long list of stuff because the PG Crypto extension has 36 functions. We get rid of all except the ones that we need. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. If you had ran into anything, let me know, and then I'll come and take a look at what you have. Okay, so now that we've got that done, let's look at the next item here. Okay, so we drop all the unneeded functions, log out of Project 3DB and log back in using Bob. Okay, so let me go back to here. Okay, so I'm going to quit out of here. Okay, so /Q or Control D. And then I want to go back into the Project 3_DB database, but as Bob. Okay, and the reason for that is then when I run init.sql and it creates the tables, then when I try to store stuff into the tables later on as Bob, I will be able to, right? Because otherwise it'll be owned by CENT280 man, the tables, and we don't want that. Okay, so some pass. Okay, and then what I want to do is can check from last time. Right, we put in init.sql inside of here, and then so let's include that. And so if I put a \d, then it shows those tables created, right? So departments, divisions, requests, there's also request view got created, so there's a view in there, and there's a users table, and then the corresponding sequences. And when you do this, if you look at the owner, it should say Bob. If it says CENT280 man, that's because you basically didn't log out as the super user and you ran init.sql as CENT280 man. Okay, so if you did that, just drop all the tables, make sure you log out, log back in as Bob, and then run init.sql again. Okay, so that's the beginning of this step. Okay, include authfuncs.sql. Okay, so let me go back here, and I'm going to go /i auth_funcs.sql. Okay, so if I do \df, you can see that in addition to the two digest functions that we have, we got the check user, do hash, make encoded pass, make salt, and I think there's one right above there, add user. Okay, so if you wanted to see this a little bit more easily in terms of being able to look at all the names of the functions at once, you can change to the unaligned format. Right, and so we have add user, check user, the two digest functions, do hash, make encoded pass, and make salt. Okay, those are the things, those are the authentication functions. So the add user function has to work in conjunction with check_user in the sense that check_user cannot return valid results unless it takes into account how the user was added, right? Because if you don't know how the user was added, how the salt was used, and so forth, you can't authenticate properly. Okay, so those two things go hand in hand. Okay, so those are stuff that you just copy and paste it, so there's nothing that you have to do other than just include them, and now those two things are included correctly. Okay, and now in the host, create the file add initial data.sql. Okay, so we're going to go into Genie and then go ahead and create that. Okay, so I'm going to start the add initial data.sql, but you need to complete this. Now, how are you going to complete this? Well, let's first start on it, and then we'll talk about how you're going to complete it. All right, so I'm starting up Genie, and here's a new file because I didn't have anything open, and this is going to be my file add initial data.sql. Right, and then I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save it into my project 3 folder. Let me click on this and check and make sure that it's the one inside of include. Okay, not the one inside of CENT280, because that's where the PHP scripts go. This SQL script has to go in the project 3 folder that's inside of the include directory that's inside of docs, inside of the main Docker folder. Okay, so let me title it. Okay, so let me start you off on this. Okay, so let's open, before I forget, init.sql, because everything relates back to that. What we want to do is, if you take a look at these tables, the tables that we need to basically set up are the divisions. Okay, so we need to insert into the divisions table, and then we need to insert into the departments table. Now, the order that you insert, you have to insert into divisions first and then departments second. Okay, the reason why is that when you're inserting into the departments table, it has the division ID field, and that means the ID for the division needs to exist, right? So before you can insert any departments, you have to insert the divisions. All right, so that means you're going to have stuff that looks like this. Insert into, right? Then you need to put the table name, divisions, and then you need to put the values that you're going to insert in. All right, now, before you go any further, I would take a look back at the project3.html file, and there's two divisions, division 1 and division 2. So it's relatively straightforward in order to get the divisions in. So let's put that in. Okay, so what we need to have is, in the divisions table, there's only two fields, the ID and then the div name. And let's insert both of them. Okay, so double check inside init.sql. Yeah, the name of the fields are ID and div name. Okay, then we put values. Okay, and if I look here, I got division 1 and division 2. So let's put those values in. I got division 1, division 2, so let's do this. So ID, I'll give ID of 1 to div 1, like this. Okay, and then do a similar thing to add in div 2. Okay, then after that's done, then you need to put insert statements to insert the departments into the departments table, but department A and department B go into the division 1. Okay, so let me just start you off a little bit on that so that you have some idea how to do that. Okay, so insert into departments. Okay, and then the departments table has an ID field. Okay, and it has a department name and division ID. Okay, so let's go with department name, division ID, values. All right, so if you look, this also has an ID field, but even though we're going to want to know the department ID, let's go look a little further ahead to look at the authfuncs.sql. Okay, when we add in a user, we need first name, last name, username, password, department name, and division name, and then the user type. Okay, so we don't need to know the department ID in order to add a user, and that's because this function goes and looks up the department ID. Okay, which means the department has to exist, okay, but you don't have to basically know what it is. So this one, I want to know what the ID is going to be, because for this department, let me move this to the next line. Okay, so for department A, the division ID is 1. I know that because I made it that on this line here above, right? So that's why that one I didn't rely on the thing just coming up with their own ID, but what I did is I set it to 1 so that I can use 1 here. Okay, so that only adds in 1 department. You got to add in all 5 departments. You got to add in both divisions. You need to add in both divisions before you add in the departments, because when you're adding in the department data, you need to make use of the division ID. Okay, so I'm going to just leave it at that. I'll give you some time to work on it, and then we'll continue in a little while.
Yes, I always wanted to do that, but I never knew how. Is there a way to like separate tabs in Genie, like one on this side and one on that side? You don't have to keep on flipping back and forth, kind of.
For what?
For Genie, like if you wanted to like make the tabs like separate, like one over here and one over here.
Oh,
Not really, huh?
just right click on it and go open a new window.
Really?
Wait, so that's not in underlying format, right? Backslash O. No, backslash O space functions dot text. What? Oh, yeah. No, but actually not for this. Possible. You just go back. Then you run the Python program, right, to create the job.sql. So, no, you gotta run it outside of the directory. So as long as you can put it out here. No, that's fine, in the Python program. And the functions.txt. Drop.sql. Say yes. Okay, then when you go back into the database, you gotta go back in as the super user, because when you run drop.sql, and then get out and come back in as well.
No, I just add everything from the zip. It's zip.
What is that occurrence to mutual database?
You're not in the data, you're not in the. Okay, so what you gotta do, PSQL, space dash U, capital U, space CENT280, space dash capital U, space CENT280.
And SQL and the project to make it
Yeah, PSQL underscore. I spelled my name
different.
It's supposed to be, you wanted to set it as an order. Try this with order space bar.
Yeah, I already did.
Then a semicolon. Okay, good. Okay, so that's that, right?
Or it should have had. Oh.
Okay, that's good. Now, you need to change into the project 3_DB. So backslash C. Backslash C. Just hit Control C. Because you didn't specify the database name. So just hit Control C. So backslash C space. Project 3_DB. I'll hit it. And then attach PGSQL underscore there.
Multiply 2 times 400.
Okay. See the type change, right? So now you go create extension PG Crystal. EXT. There's no EXT. Semicolon. Yep. Okay. And now what we gotta do is go backslash A. To underline the format. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Then backslash O. Space functions.txt. You should have opened the login page when you hit enter. Okay. Backslash DF. So backslash DF. And backslash O. Yeah. And then open up another shell into the same directory so that you can run the Python program to create drop.sql. Okay, so if you created add initial data.sql correctly, then when you include it, then you should have your 2 divisions and your 5 departments. Oh, I made a mistake on mine, the wrong division ID. So I have to go and fix mine. Okay, so let me go ahead and fix that. Okay, so let's see if I can fix this. Okay, that looks correct now. Okay, so Department A and B are in Division 1. Department C, D, and E are inside of Division 2. Okay, so hopefully that's what you get when you include your add initial data.sql. Okay, so if you got something different, then you need to work on that and do the same thing that I did because I had a mistake. So I reran init.sql, so it cleared out the tables, and I ran add initial data.sql, and the result you should get should look like this. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do after you bring those things in is we're going to copy the table from project3.html that has a user's information and paste into a file called users.txt. Okay, so let's set up for that. Okay, I'm going to make a new file like this. Then I'm going to go back to project3.html, and I'm going to scroll down. Okay, we got those 2 things in there already, and here's the user's information. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this, because it's just a HTML table. I'm going to copy that. Okay, so I hit Control C. Notice that I didn't select the header line, because that's just an extra line I would need to skip over when I process the file anyway. So I just selected all the data rows below the first line. I'm just going to paste into here. Okay, and I'm going to save this inside of my Project 3 folder, the one that's inside of include, and I'm just going to call this users.txt. Okay, so this right here is probably tabs that's separating it, but yeah, because I see different amount of spacing in between them. But remember, if it's tabs or spaces, if you call split without any arguments inside of the split function, then basically it'll split it either way. So what we want to do is we want to write a program, a Python program that will process this file here, so that we can add the users making use of add user. All right, so what we want to do is add user requires first name, last name, username, password, department name, division name, and then user type. Okay, and then so let's go ahead and set that up. All right, so I'm going to go to my second terminal here. I'm just going to do an ls, right? So we have users.txt. We're going to create a Python program in Genie to start processing users.txt. Okay, so I go back to Genie. Let's go a new file, and okay, I'm just going to call this makeAddUsers.py, and I'm going to save it in Project 3 inside the include directory. And this will start off like most of the Python programs we use to process these text files. Okay, so we're going to open users.txt. Because there's no header line, I'm going to read in all the lines at once from the very beginning. Okay, and then I'm going to process that list. Okay, strip off the new line character on the end, and I call split, but I don't use anything as arguments in there, so it'll use the default. It'll just look for any white space and split on that, and then I just say print tokens. Okay, so we've done that similar kind of thing in a number of cases right now. So same thing, this is nothing new. The only thing that's a little bit different is instead of trying to put explicitly the delimiting character, because we're not sure if it's spaces or tabs, we just call split without any arguments, and then it doesn't matter if it's spaces or tabs, it'll split on the white space. Okay, so I go to my second ConEMU terminal, and I'm going to run this. Okay, makeAddUsers.py, and if you look at it, it's splitting apart everything correctly. So you know the split function worked, right? Without any arguments, because it doesn't matter whether it's spaces or tabs. If you call split without any arguments, then it'll split it on the white space. And if you look, this is the white space. I mean, it's split correctly because you can see that this is first name, last name, username. There's no password in this. Doesn't make sense to display the password in some kind of view. Okay. This is the user type. This is going to be the department name, and this is going to be the division name. Okay, so I knew what it was going to look like users.txt, so that's why I chose my department names and my division names accordingly. And so if you didn't choose it so that it would match these set of things here, then you probably want to go back and change that in your add initial data.sql. Okay, so You would want to go there and then fix this. Okay, so what we want to do, the basic idea is the following. We want to make use of this function, add user. In order to do that, we got to pass the first name, the last name, the username, password, which we'll make up, okay, and then department name, division name, and then the user type, and then so forth. Okay, so let's work on doing something like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put FN for first name, and I take a look at this terminal here, and its first name is token 0, last name is tokens 1. So let's do that. Okay, the next thing I need to insert in is the username. So if I take a look at the terminal, username is tokens index 2. Okay, so let's go back and put that in. Okay, so here username equals tokens index 2. Okay, let's take a look at this again. And so tokens index 2 is username, then it's user type. Okay, so let's set that. Okay, then looking back at this, then I got department name and then I got division name. Okay, so department name, I'll just put div name, it's the name of my variable. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to glance at users.txt, and I got Jane Doe, John Doe, Katherine Johnson, Bill Gates, Bruce Perens, Eric Raymond, Ada Lovelace, Grace Hopper, Scott Birkin. Right, so they're basically the 9 names like this. So I'm going to make up a list that has passwords for each of them that I'll just use right here. Okay, so I'm just going to make up some strings for their passwords. So Jane Doe was the first one, so just like the other times we dealt with Jane Doe, we'll just choose that password. Okay, then the next one is John Doe. So I'll just put, just like we did for John Doe before. Okay, then the next user is Katherine Johnson. And she was the human calculator that worked for NASA when they were going through the space program, so the Apollo program, also the Mercury program. Okay, then let's see, Bill Gates. Let's give him a password of Windows. Okay, then Bruce Perens, he's an open source guy, so we'll just put open source. Okay, then the next one is Eric Raymond, and I'll put Cat B for Cathedral in the Bazaar. That's a famous essay that he wrote. Okay, then let's see, Ada Lovelace. I'll just put Ada. And Grace Hopper, we'll put bug. She's the one who came up with the term bug for computer programs. In those days, the computers actually consisted of a bunch of relays and switches, and they found a moth that was smashed in between a switch. And then so from that point on, she termed errors in the software, she called them bugs. Okay, and then let's see, Scott Birkin. let's put, I'll put creative. All right, now you can certainly change your passwords from that. I'm not saying you need to use that. And what I'm going to do, based upon using this, I'm going to switch this to an index-based for loop so that I can process two lists at once. So I need to change this to an index value like this. And then what I'm going to say is password equals passwords index I. So for the first line, you'll put Janie, second line, I'll put John, and then so forth. Okay, so you can choose a different set of passwords. You can add the passwords in later. I really don't care how you do it. But in your instructions for setup, you need to say where the passwords are so that whoever's trying out your program, which is me, I know what passwords to enter in for the different users, right? And then so I know where I would put it, but you need to state where you're going to put it. Also, it is a really good idea in the setup, okay, to run drop.sql to get rid of the extra PG crypto extension functions, but it's not a good idea to say run this Python program to create drop.sql. It is far better to include drop.sql in the files you submit and then to say to run it as the administrative user, the root user. Okay, so what is this going to look like? I'm going to say print, easy to start it off, select, add user, okay. And then the first thing is first name, so that needs a single quote in front of it, right? And then the next thing is going to be the last name, so that has a single quote in front of it. And let's start with just something like this. Okay, so first name and last name. After add user, let me go to my second terminal and let me run this. And so it says select add user, Jane Doe, John Doe. Okay, so far it's looking like it's working correctly, right? So let's add in a few more things. Okay, so let's put comma and equals an empty string so that the next print statement is still on the same line. Okay, so let's see, I just put in last name, so that means I need a single quote, a comma. The next thing that's supposed to go into there is username. Okay, so let's put that in. Okay, and then let's close that off and run it. Yeah, try not to put in too many things at once. Oh, I missed my quote there. Okay, sorry. My ending quote for that string. Okay, wonder it looked funny. Okay, so let's try that again. All right, so select add user, Jane Doe, and I started to put in the username. I don't have the ending single quote there, so I got to put that in. All right, so I jump back to this. Okay, so after username is going to be the password. Okay, so I got plus, okay, single quote, comma, single quote, plus password. Okay, and then I'm going to run this. Okay, and so these passwords are coming in simply in the order that I put it inside of that passwords list, right? So it's stuff that I just made up, right? It doesn't have to be, so you can choose different ones if you want to. It's just that you got to make sure the person testing your program knows what password to use. Okay, for each of the users. All right. And assume that all of the users could be tested, so you need to say this is where the passwords are located for each of the users. All right. Now, okay, so I got the password mostly in, but not completely. Okay, so that's the ending quote at the end of the password. After password, it's supposed to be the department name, then the division name. Okay, so let's do things one at a time. Okay, so here's, oops, that's a mistake. Okay, so department name. Okay, so let's just put in department name. Not too many things at once. Oops. I misspelled print. Sorry about that. Okay, so I got first name, last name, username, password, and part of the department name. Okay, so I need to put the ending quote and then the starting quote before the division name. So I named that variable div name. Okay, so I'm going to put those two things in. Run this again. Okay, and that looks like it's coming in okay. So after division name, oh wait, let me take a look at this again. Yeah, this is getting kind of long. I guess that's okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a comma. After this comma, I'm going to put a new line character and then continue on the next line. So let me fix it so it does that. Okay, so here after the password, let me take a look at this again. Yeah, after the password, yeah, why don't I make it after the password? I'm going to put, after this comma here, I'm going to put a new line character. So let's do that. So here's password. There's the comma after the password. So let's put a \n here for a new line character, and I'm going to run it again. Okay, so when you're doing these kind of things, try to make it so it's only doing a little change at a time. So after this comma after the password, I put stuff on the next line. And I'd like to actually for it to be indented a little bit. So I'm going to put some spaces here. Run it again. And that looks like what I wanted. So after the division name, I got to put a single quote, a comma, and then the last part is going to be the user type. So let's return to this, right? So division name and then user type, those are all strings. So I got the division name, print, okay, single quote, comma, single quote, okay, plus the user type. And then I need a single quote, ending parentheses, semicolon, and that's the end of that string. And then I'm going to run this again. Whoops, what happened there? Oh, sorry, I forgot to put end equals empty space there. Okay, so it broke it up, and I don't want it broken up the way it got broken up. Let me attempt that again. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so select add user function, pass the first name in single quotes, last name in single quotes, the username in single quotes, the password in single quotes, the department name in single quotes, the division name in single quotes, and then the user type in single quotes. Okay, so if that's correct, and it looks like it's correct now, And I'm going to run this again, and then I'm going to create a script called addusers.sql. Okay. And that means that if I include that, it should add the users in. And it looks like it added 9 users in. If we do select star from users, we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff that I probably don't want to look at. So I'll do something a little bit different. Let me go select first name, comma, last name from users. And then that's at least a little bit easier to look at, right? So I got Jane Doe, John Doe, Katherine Johnson, Bill Gates, Bruce Perens, Eric Raymond, Ada Lovelace, Grace Hopper, and Scott Birkin. All right. So if that worked correctly, now remember, just because you got them inserted in there doesn't mean that they're in correctly. So what we need to do is call the check user function to determine if they got inserted correctly. So that means I would go select, check user, and then see what this returns. Okay, so it returns 1, which is Jane Doe's user ID, Jane Doe's ID, her department, her division, and her user type, which is department head. Okay, now, eventually when we actually run a query on the database using check user, we want to do something like this, but we want to get the syntax down so that instead of returning it like this, which is something that I have to break apart, so to return, we got to get, if I return it like this, I got to get index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. I would prefer not to do it that way. I would prefer to get it so it breaks it out into separate fields. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so select, check, not select, select ID, comma, it's supposed to return the department name, so I'll put department name, div name, comma, user type from check user, and then for check user I'm going to put Jane Doe at gmail.com and her password. Okay, and then I put as ID, which is text. No, it's not text. What am I saying? Integer. And department name, as which is supposed to be text. Division name, which is text, and user type as text. Okay, so the names of these variables that I put here, I could choose what I want. Those don't have to be actual field names, because what you're returning is a record which is all just comma separated. So what you do need to do though is that if I call it ID here, I gotta put ID here, because the as part is basically stating what the variable type is for each of those things that you're returning. Okay, so let's see if I got this correct. Yeah. Okay, so what happens then is that it'll return as the ID one, as the department name, div name, division 1, and then user type, department head. This looks a little bit better if you realign the format. Okay, then it looks like this. Okay, so let's look at that syntax again, because we're going to want to use that eventually when we start writing our PHP scripts, which we're not going to do today, but eventually we need to do that. Okay, so if I just go select check user, Jane Doe at gmail.com, Janie, then it's going to return basically something that's like a tuple, okay, or there's an array, and then so you got to pick each one out of the array in order to use it, which you can, but it's kind of nicer when you return it to return it as the regular kind of record that we return, So instead, the record, if I get it inside of PHP, this will be stored in the ID field, this will be stored in the department name field, this will be stored in div name, and this will be stored in user type. Okay, so it's a little bit easier to look at in terms of the code, not because it's shorter to type out, it's a little longer to type out, but it makes more sense when you're looking at it. Okay, so it's actually better. And when you write code, it's not always, the goal is not always simply, okay, to make the code as short as possible. Sometimes you make it longer, like the way that I'm doing here, because it's going to be clearer. So if I look at this, in the PHP we'll write something like this. When I look at that like a year from now or something, or even 2 months from now, I will say, oh yeah, that's what I'm getting when I call check user. I'm getting the ID, the department name, the division name, and the user type. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful. So if I do this, right, select check user, you do have to make sure, right, that you keep it in the order that it actually is returning things. And that's determined in the check user function itself. Okay, so if you took a look at the auth funcs and you looked at check user, that basically is how it's returning it. The ID, the department name, the division name, and then the user type. That's the order it returns it. So you need to, oops, wrong one. Yeah. Keep this in the same order as the data that's getting returned, like that. And if you forget, if you just run it without putting those extra things to name those things coming back and break it apart, then when you look at this, you can tell what the correct order is. Yeah. Okay, any questions on that? So, but quick check, right? If I did this, so not typing out that whole thing, that should work correctly, but if I change the password, then see what it returns? It returns an error. If I change the email address, okay, then it returns things. And the only difference is the first number that it returns. Okay, but both of those are errors. When it returns a correct result, then this number that returns is the user's ID, so that has to be greater than 0, right? But if it's less than 0, then they're not logged in correctly. So when we do the handle login later on, we're going to check to see the ID number that gets returned, and if it's greater than 0, then we're going to store the department name, the division name, and the user type, and the ID, because that person has been logged in correctly. Okay, and you can go ahead and check to see if all the others work correctly or not. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so within the database, just verify that it returns the correct values. Test using the users you just added in. Okay, so I tested I actually only tested Jane Doe. So what I would want to do, looking at addusers.sql, Jane Doe was Janie, John Doe is John, so I can, instead of typing out that whole thing, okay, that comes in, that's correct. You can go and check the rest of them. Okay, you don't have to, actually you check a couple and it's working, then you know that it's going to work. As long as you enter the correct password. All right, if I check 2 of them, then that basically should be correct. Okay, so go ahead and work on this. I I'm not sure why the light went off. I'm gonna check to see why the hallway light is off. Okay, I don't know why it went off, but it's off. Turn it back.
Okay, coconut oil.
Saying we're at
Okay, so you have all kinds of stuff that you're gonna need to fix, because you're in as a regular user. Actually, you're in as a super user and you include stuff that the regular user needs to include. So that you need to fix. Okay, so, no, it's okay to be in as the super user initially.
Oh, I see.
Because then you need to fix stuff up first. So, if you do this, you see what the CENT280 band, which is not correct. So, the first thing you wanna do is drop all of this stuff.
You got a good sign? Is there something that I have to ask you?
Yeah, so basically, we need the first ones of each.
Yes.
So you need to add, so if you go to, this page, basically you need to make sure you have two thresholds at this point.
Oh, okay, so then that would be insert divisions on same line, but div two,
Yeah.
and departments B.
Or you need
A all
departments
the
A
way
to
to
E,
E.
and then make sure they're in the correct
Probably
division.
include the off-forms in here.
Do you make sure they were in the correct division?
So, you know that there's a one
So,
at the
yeah,
end?
first thing we
That
wanna
is
do
one
is
to the division.
Oh,
Just
I
do some
see,
functions,
got
stuff.
you. So then this would be division one of
No,
here.
Yeah, and then so forth for each.
Gotcha. I see.
Okay, so let's move into this sequence now.
Yeah, I didn't copy the header, that's why. Copy the header and then you have to skip the.
So this-
No, just, it's just all the.
Oh, you just did it yourself?
Yeah, I didn't copy it.
Oh, okay.
So it's this file. Right, to drop that SQL. And could you click the functions and see? Functions that takes the what we just did, right? Inside, first one. Okay, and then some funny stuff in there. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even move. You gotta underline goes into the output file, and this finishes right. Okay, so this one is, so put functions like PHP. Just type it. I get it.
Next year, the year after that one.
It's on revisions 1 and 2. Yeah, AV is wrong. It's in all of this. So
And then we just start over. Just.
If you put Y for this.
well, I see it's running again. So it's not finding the shit.
That's cute. Now,
Instead of doing that, let's run.
backslash I. Okay, now go backslash here. Okay, that's what that part is sitting. Now,
That got rid of all.
now you gotta get out of the database, because everything from that point on should be done using it. Okay, so now you gotta go back in and out. No. You just trying to go into the Bob database. The username is Bob, right? Yeah, okay, that's something. Okay, so you see, these little columns and why they weird, that's how you do it. So, what you can do is go backslash I, here, that is SQL. Okay, now do a backslash D. Yeah? That one is called, that's what you want, right? Now go backslash I, off, underscore, yeah. Yeah, now those ways. So if you do backslash A for underline and backslash DF, then you're gonna see you have the diving stuff plus the ones that are off functions. So now you're set up to have the users. So did you have initial data that SQL you got? If you're doing so this include add initial data. Okay, so this is
Is that matching with function?
You're on your,
oh no, that's correct. I'm just calling wrong. So that looks fine.
you're
So
on the
add users should work.
onward. So you want the add users. They don't work like that.
You run make add users to create add users. So you This is the super user. Okay, so that where do you want to
Weekend time? I mean, it's the first episode. I started with this. Yeah. Yeah.
So that part you haven't. Okay, so you still don't have the digest function in there. Oh, okay. So that you have to do as super user. Which is important because when you're doing the setup, current project view, this is one of the important steps. So you gotta add this, otherwise those functions don't be. And then add in a whole bunch of extra functions, so you gotta get rid of these. So you gotta add that. So you go to the other tab, and this kind of makes the drop nut to launch, the pipe will literally drop nut to launch. In your functions. Alright, now come back to your, let's go back to our drop nuts. Okay, so go back to the you see that you have, okay, you got rid of the other ones for that. Okay, so, yeah, so just put on here, go back to this bar, redo the bar side. Now we back to here. That's good. So then when you add users, it should be.
Next year, you send it to me. Username is like the email.
Okay, so if you got it so that you got your users added in, and then you check to see that the correct, if you when you supply the correct password, then it brings things in correctly. Okay, you've done most of the stuff that you need to do to set up the backend database. Okay, and when you're setting up a web application, as much as is possible, you try to set up and test out everything on the back end before you start writing any PHP scripts. Okay, because you want to minimize where the errors are coming from by the time you look at the PHP scripts. If you test everything that you can in the back end side, then if you have errors once you start working on the PHP scripts, then most likely it's due to something in the PHP script, not in the back end database. If you don't test this stuff as fully as you can, then it could be in the backend database, could be a PHP scripts, harder to track down, right? Because you're not sure where to look. You got to do more of a process of elimination. Okay, so that's basic things to look at. Even though I didn't write anything to go on next, the next step would be to start doing some initial testing of the PHP scripts. And since we got time, let's take a look at that. Okay, so let me get back to the part where it says which scripts you need to modify. Okay, so the scripts you need to modify: handle login.php, home.php, choose request.php, and handle edit request.php. But before we go too much further on, in fact, we could, let's take a look at what we have there. Okay, so here's this one is still connected to this database. This one was just inside of that directory, and we don't really need to do much there. Let me think. Yeah, we got the things added in for a time being. Okay, so that looks good. So I'm going to exit out of this, and then I'm going to go back into the PHP Apache container. Okay, so Docker compose php-apache. Okay, and then I'm going to do a ls and 2 dots, so I look at the parent directory, and I'm going to look inside the include directory, which has project 3, and we got all those files that we were just working on, but one of the key files there is this project3.php. So what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to go cat includes project3/project3.php. I just want to display it. Okay, and where it assumes that the Postgres SQL IP address is 172.19.0.1. Okay, so is that in fact the correct place, or do we have to change that? Okay, so here, I'm gonna go back here. Let me just close up these things. Init, yeah, I don't think we even need that. Auth funcs, maybe. Not that, not that. This we need. Okay, so I'm gonna go open, and I'm gonna go to docs CENT280. Okay. Oh, sorry. Docs include project 3. Let me open project3.php. Okay, so this is 172.19.0.1. We want to make sure that that's the correct IP address for the Postgres SQL service. So how do we do that? Let me go back to my second shell. Yeah, actually I should have done this before going in. Let me exit out of there. All right. What we do okay, is we go Docker network list, and the one we're looking for, of course, is this, right? Docker CENT280 win7_default. Then we go Docker network inspect. Okay. Then we want to inspect 2A06F3. That's the first 6 digits of the ID. That's long enough. And then we're gonna pipe this to group regular expression. Let's make it so it's not case sensitive, and I'm going to type gateway. And it is correct. Okay, so I must have changed it because I know that's different from the computer I tested it out at in my office. Okay, so that looks correct, so that part is okay. All right. So verify that actually matches. That's something, if you don't already have in your notes how to do that, you should have that, because that's going to be part of the setup also for project 3, right? Just like it was for project 1. Okay, now let's go into the PHP Apache. Now that we verified that that should work, let's go into this. Okay, so from here, right, I want to change into the project 3 directory. Okay, so I'm inside of project 3 inside of CENT280. So this is where your main PHP scripts are supposed to reside. Okay, this is because CENT280 inside of docs is the web document root for the Apache server. You can certainly broadcast files from here. That's why the main PHP scripts are there. That's also why those other scripts are outside of that. They're above the CENT280 folder. They're not underneath it, so they can't be broadcast by the Apache server. Okay, so that's a basic security precaution. All right, so if I do a ls here, it's going to have the files that we copied from the first day that we were working on the project. Okay? And the ones that we're going to have to make changes to, if you look here, it's going to be handle login, home, choose request, and then handle edit request. Okay? The order that it's listed here is the order that you should work on them, because if you're running the application, that basically is the order that you would use if you're trying to run the web application itself. Now, I would like to test if I can log in correctly. Okay, so that means that handle login is something you would want to work on anyway. Okay, but let's go back and take a look at what we have in this directory. Okay, so if you see all those files there, let's talk about some of the ones that don't need to be modified but are very important and are very simple. Okay, so index.php. Okay, Apache will look for index.html, index.htm, or index.php, and it will load that first. If it doesn't find any of those, then it's going to allow directory browsing, which means it's going to display everything. Okay, so if that's the other thing. I need to figure out, right, what the correct address is for the browser to connect to everything. And Yeah, let me just go ahead and open another PowerShell. Okay, so here, Docker machine IP, my Docker. And for my machine, it's this. It might not be this on every machine, but on my machine it's this. 192.168.80.131. Okay, so I'm going to open up Chrome. Okay, so I start up Chrome. And if you were to look in the Docker compose.yaml file, you see that port 80 in the container, the PHP Apache container, when it goes outside the container, it goes to port 8080. So it doesn't interfere with the regular internet connection, right, which is on port 80. Okay, so, how come Chrome didn't start? Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay, so IP address 192.168.80.131. And the port is 8080. Okay, and then I'm going to put project 3. Okay, so if I just put in project 3, then what happens? What's happening there? That's not right. Oh, there we go. It jumped to this page. If you look up here, that means it reached login.php, even though I just typed project 3. The reason why is it found index.php and it executed index.php. So, how does that actually work? Well, let's take a look at it. Okay, so let's go to docs CENT280 project 3. Let's open index.php and you'll get an idea. Okay, so what it does is it finds index.php, header is redirect, it redirects to logout.php. Okay, so let's look at logout.php. What it does is it connects to the session that would have been opened up when you log in, okay, and it destroys it, so it wipes out that session, and then it goes back to login.php. So when it found index.php, it went to logout.php, logout.php wiped out the session if it existed, and then it redirects to login.php, and that's why we wound up at login.php here. Okay, so let's do something temporarily, and that's here. I'm going to go move index.php to index.php.bak. So index.php doesn't exist anymore because I just renamed it. So if I go back to here and I just put this in project, you can see that that's the file that prevents directory browsing. This is directory browsing, where you can see the files that are located inside of that. Okay, so this is a very important file, index.php. Even though it doesn't look like it does much, it actually is performing a very important security function. Okay, so I put it back, and I reload this, and it jumps to login.php because it went to logout.php, which wiped out the session data, and then returned to login.php. Okay, so if I enter in janedoe@gmail.com and put Janie and I hit enter, what happens is login.php will call handle login.php to process things. So actually we want to take a look at the first file we want to edit, which is login.php. Well, handle login.php. We can look at login.php also. What you see is that what it does, very important, is it starts the session. Now session data is used to hold things that we don't have a good way to pass to the next script. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. Even though you're not responsible for PHP scripting for this course, it's good to understand a little bit about it. When you create a form, here's the HTML markup, here's a form. In the start tag for the form element, the action attribute specifies the processing script. So when you click on the submit button, it's going to send things to handle login.php, and assuming that file exists, it's going to use that to process the information that you pass. If the method attribute in the form start tag is post, that means it passes them via post. The other option is passing via get. When you pass via get, it'll all be on the URL. It gets all the variables you pass will be tacked on to the end of the URL. Okay, but passing via post, so that's how this data, okay, the one called user and the one called pass, gets passed to handle login.php. But if you do a redirect using the header function and you jump to another page, to get data from one page to another page, you put it inside of the session data. That's the purpose for the session data, is to store it so that you have those variables available on the different pages. Because otherwise, if you can't pass it via post, as in a submit form, and you're just doing a header redirect, you got no way to get it there unless you use get. And then that's a security risk because you can see all the names of the variables and their values on the URL. Okay, it would be stuck on the end of the URL. Okay, so let's look at handle login.php. Okay. And all the files that you have to modify will have comments. Some is to comment on something that I use to debug the scripts. But others will be things like this. There'll be instructions and it says set session variables. Okay, so if you take a look, let's scroll up. If you recall earlier when I was calling the checked user function, that the long way of calling it will make it so that it returns things in a much easier to handle fashion, right? So select the ID, department name, div name, user type from checked user. We're going to pass it the username and password, okay? But then we need to put as, so you need to say ID is an integer, department name is text, div name is text, user type is text. It's going to return those things. So we set this up. We already have connected to the database, right? If we didn't, it would have died right here. So we connected to the database. Okay, we prepare this statement, and we're going to do prepare and execute. Okay, so we store the values. This is going to be the username and password that were entered by the user on the login page. Okay, then we run it. Okay, now we pull this back, then what we do is we check the value returned for the ID. If we put in a bad username or a good username but bad password, it's going to return a negative number for that value. So if this is greater than 0, that means the user authenticated properly. So what this does is it says we're going to jump to home.php. Okay, that's a redirect. Since we're doing a redirect, okay, not a form where you're submitting a form, whatever variables you want to be available in home.php, you have to store the session variables. Okay, so that's basically what needs to be done. Okay, so the idea is we have to do this. Okay, so $_session, all capital letters like this. The ID would be this ID. We're going to store it there. Okay, So that's one of the session variables. But what also gets stored? Department name, div name, user type, so you would store all of those things. Okay, so when we're setting the session variables, that's how you do it. $_ session, all capital letters. Then it's an associative array, yeah? So it's name, key, right? So key value pairs. So you put the name that you want to use for the key, and then you store it that way. Now, so I store it like this, but I need to look ahead a little bit because this thing is going to relocate to home.php. So let me open up home.php. And it says here, get session variable set by handle login.php. So we need to do this. We're also going to need to do this, okay, in order to make more progress on this. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit so that you have some idea where to start. Okay, so let's look at the comment. This is just a name. Okay, we don't need to do anything with this. Get the session variables. We do need to do something with this. Okay, now, this is just a var dump. That's debugging purposes. Hey, the rest of the stuff is clear. So we need to do these two things. So we need to get the session variables, and then we need to handle the member and div head cases. Okay, let's think about what that means. Okay. If the user type is department head, like Jane Doe is a department head, then it's going to do this, and that case is handled. But if it's a member like John Doe or div head, I think Bill Gates was div head, then those are not handled. You're going to need to handle that. Okay, that's not today. That's something to think about. You need to handle. But let's look at this case. I mean, this case in the selection statement. What we're using is the variable $department name, which is nowhere defined in this, which means it has to come out of the session data. So one of the things we need to do is the following. We're going to say $department name. We're going to get it from the session data. Okay? Except that means I had to have stored the department name in the session data on the previous page. So let me go back to handle login and let's store that. Okay, so where's it going to be? It's going to be in the variable $row, okay, and the name of it will be DEPT_name. Okay, now how do I know that? Because I said select ID, dep name, department name, and then I put department name here. So it's going to be stored in the variable department name inside that row. That's how it's going to return. So I store that here so that when this redirects to home.php, department_name is available on that page. Because I yank it out of the session data so it's available, then I can use it right here. Okay, so in order to do that correctly, you need to have more experience than you would have had at this point. That's why I'm going through it so that you know what kind of things to do. Okay, so here's what you want to think about, or you're going to have to do. When it says set the session variables, doesn't make sense to just store 2 of them when there are 4, right? So you're going to store all 4 of them here. Okay. Then when you go to this page, you're going to retrieve all 4 of them. Okay, so make sure that you keep that in mind. Let's see now. Okay, And then the rest is just being careful, just make sure you're matching things correctly. Okay, so remember the session array is an associative array, so this is the name of the key. So if I put a different name here than what I did when I stored it, yeah, here's where I'm storing it right here. If I put a different name here than I put here, then it's not going to work, right? I got to make sure that those things match, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, so if I go to Chrome, and since Jane Doe is a department head, I can try Jane Doe out. I will enter, and then, oh, we got some kind of error showing up. Okay, so on home.php line 23, okay, so what you would have to do is go here and take a look and go, oh, okay, when I tried to return a row based upon this query, it didn't have anything inside of it. Okay, so, oh, let's take a look. Look, $user type. I messed up. I don't even have $user type, so basically it had no cases to form the SQL statement. And so, of course, when it tries to run that SQL, there's no results. And so when I do fetch on something that there's no results in it, then that's when I get that error there. Okay, so take a look at this. I need to store user type. Okay, so let's get that variable from session data. $user underscore type equals $_ capital session user type. Okay, but I gotta check, did I even store that in handle login? And the answer is no, I did not. So I better store it. Okay, so let me store that. Okay, and then I want to spell it the same way. Okay, so I need to check, right? From the row, user underscore type, yeah, that's how I spelled it here, right? So that has to match. If I put this and it doesn't match the name that comes back from the query, then it's not going to work. Okay, so let me go back here and hit a back, and then let's try that again. Okay, this time it got in, so that means that my handle login is partly correct, and my home.php is partly correct. It's not fully correct. It only works good enough for Jane Doe, who is the department head. If I try to log in with a different user, okay, that's not a department head, then it wouldn't work. You would see errors showing up. Okay, so let's talk about that just a little bit. Okay, so in handle login, well, I stored 3 of the variables returned from the check user call to check user. So you got to store the 4th one. Okay, and I'll leave that up to you. Okay, and then here I retrieved just 2 of the session variables, but you probably should retrieve all 4 of them. Okay, if you accidentally put the wrong name for stuff, things are not going to work, right? So if I put this here, okay, so that's wrong, because in the session data there is no variable that has the value, key value user underscore TYP. So that's a mistake, right? So I spelled it wrong. So if I went back to here and I tried Jane Doe again, I'm going to get an error. And that's because, okay, this session data, user underscore TYP, doesn't exist. Why doesn't it exist? Because when I stored it here, I named it user underscore TYPE. So if I did this, I wouldn't want to do this, okay? But you could. Let's say I spell it user underscore TYP here. So I stored it that way, so I retrieve it that way, then it should work. Yeah? it works now because I made it match. It's not a good way to do it, but then you get the point. Now, what about this? If I hit the wrong stuff. Okay, so if I look at this, can I change this to any string that I want? You cannot, right? This is determined by the query that I ran here. That's what it's naming the data that's coming back when you run the query. So this has to match this. Okay, if I change this to anything else, then the user type is not going to be stored correctly. So what I usually do is I try to make all of these names, okay, so this name here, and then this name here, all the same, all match. And then that way I won't have it spelled one way someplace and then get all mixed up with it. Okay, so this should work now the way that's set up. Okay, so what do you have to do? You have to add 2 more statements getting all the session data, because there's 4 values stored in session data. And here, I actually only stored 3 of them. Okay, so make sure you store the division name also, right? So remember, that's div underscore name. Okay, so make sure you do that. And then also in this handles a case where we have a department head logging in, but you could also just have a department member logging in. You could have the division head logging in. And so those are the 2 cases it's saying to handle. So you have 2 other cases that you need to handle there. Okay? So you need to think about that. But that I'm not gonna have you go into that today. That's more stuff than I actually had intended to go into. Okay, but you see how it's gonna work. You need to, the parts that you're responsible for are the parts that deal with the data itself, not the markup or things like that, or how to display stuff on the page. But the part where you're manipulating the data, that's the part that you're responsible for in the PHP scripts. Okay, and you're not expected to figure that stuff all out on your own. So what I'm going to do though is put in part of the code, show it to you, and then what you try to do is complete the code. Okay, so handle login and handle login.php and home.php are not done yet. Handle login.php is pretty close, because I set 3 of the session variables. You just got to set the 4th one. Okay, so that's pretty easy. That's that should be pretty straightforward. Okay, and then home.php, that you need to get all 4 session variables here instead of just these 2. And then you have 2 cases, so you have to think of setting stuff up like this. Okay, and we'll discuss that later. Now, suppose I wanted to put up handle login.php and home.php up on Laulima just so that you could see that. I could not put those files up directly because they have PHP in the name and Laulima is going to clobber them. Okay, so what could I do instead? Oh wait, before I forget, let me just log out so it clears the session data. Okay, so if I want to get those things up to Laulima, then this is what I would have to do. Okay, so documents, Docker, main Docker folder, docs, CENT280, project 3, right? I can't upload these files directly. So what I'll do instead is right click on this and go send to compressed zip folder. And I'm going to rename this project 3 underscore 04 underscore 15 underscore 19. So today's date. Oh wait, what happened here? I think I renamed too much of it. Okay, so there's that zip file. The zip file will protect the PHP scripts. So if I come back to here, allow Lima, keep my session active. I'm going to upload it into the folder with today's name. Okay, which is this right here, this zip file. I'm going to upload that. That has all the PHP scripts in that folder. But the two that we modified partly to get it working partially are in there as well. Okay, so that has the changes. Now, if ever you wanted to see what was changed, okay, if you took the original files and you took these files and on the command line inside the container, you just go diff, D-I-F-F, and you put the names of the files, it'll show you the lines that were changed. Yeah. And then that's one way to do it. And how do you get the original files? Well, you go back to resources, and you go to projects, and you go to project 3, and inside of this docs.zip, that has all the original PHP scripts. Okay, so if you wanted to see just the changes, look at those two things, rename the file so it doesn't clobber, one doesn't clobber each other. Then you just go diff, put the two file names, and it'll show you all the differences between the two. Okay, let me end it right there then. If you have ran into any questions, raise your hand and I'll take a look at what you have. Otherwise, that's it for today.